telling you about the #1 design mistake you can make when you're making YouTube thumbnails. Now, this mistake is going to keep your videos from going viral. It is going to absolutely ruin your click-through rate. So this is a massive thing you want to avoid, and we're going to get into that today. Before we do though, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm going to be posting content talking about YouTube design principles for your thumbnails, as well as just YouTube in general. So go ahead and subscribe if you want to get that content. Now, let's go ahead and get right into the video. Before we delve into the #1 mistake you can make when you're designing a YouTube thumbnail, in terms of the design principles that are very consistent, I want to go ahead and take you through a few things about YouTube thumbnails in general and why they're so important. There are a lot of people who use YouTube thumbnails for their content. In general, I would say most YouTube creators, whether you're a hobbyist or a large YouTuber, you are using a thumbnail to promote your content. You are using YouTube thumbnails to essentially sell your brand. These thumbnails obviously display in place of your video for anyone who's interested in clicking on your content. But I want to take a second to go ahead and reinforce really how important these thumbnails are to your brand and how important they are to growing. Now, a YouTube thumbnail is essentially one of the two most important things for growing your channel that is actually visual to the viewer. There are 3 very important aspects to growing any YouTube video that you need to be thinking about at any time. The #1 is obviously the YouTube thumbnail. #2 is going to be the title, and #3 is going to be the SEO, or the description of the YouTube video. Now, I'll get into all of those later on in another video, but for now what you need to know is that these are the 3 parts which you need to be thinking about when you're selling your video. Now, obviously everyone says that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but because of that it makes sense that a video would be worth way more than that. And in that sense, it is very hard to display your entire video as just a YouTube title. If you're trying to summarize your video into just a YouTube title, it can be incredibly hard to do that. And while that is something that you do have to do, the YouTube thumbnail is there to help you with that. And this is why YouTube thumbnails are so incredibly important. Every pixel in your YouTube thumbnail matters when it comes to getting conversions and getting that click-through rate. When you have people who see your channel or who see one of your videos recommended on their feed, you have to capture their attention and you have to convince them that your video is actually worth clicking on. You have to basically show them why they should be watching your video as opposed to any of the other videos on their feed. And when they're on something like their home feed or even the suggested videos, that is a lot of competition. You have at least 10 to 20 suggested videos on any of your content which is suggesting on the sidebar, and you've got even more videos you have to compete with on your home page. Because of that, the design of your YouTube thumbnail is incredibly important. And obviously the space which you are designing in matters as well. If you only designed half of your YouTube thumbnail and left the other half completely blank, unless that was an integral part of your video, that would not be an effective design to go ahead and sell your video and get more content. You want to use up your YouTube thumbnail space, at least insofar as it is effective in generating curiosity of the viewer. And this gets into the thumbnail design principle and the big mistake which I think people are making when they are designing YouTube thumbnails. The mistake is that the lower right hand corner of the screen in any YouTube thumbnail, the lower right hand portion is actually covered up by the timestamp which YouTube has on any video, whether it's on the sidebar, whether it's on the home page, whether it's on the suggested, no matter where it is, YouTube puts essentially a timestamp in the lower right hand corner of the video display. Now, this timestamp might not seem like a big of a deal because on the home page, on your channel, it's not very intrusive. With that being said, it becomes a lot more intrusive when it shows up on your sidebar, when it shows up other places that can have a massive effect on the design of your thumbnail. This is a massive issue, and this is something which a lot of people don't think about when they're actually designing YouTube thumbnails. When you're designing a YouTube thumbnail, and if you put any content which is relevant to generating the curiosity and getting people to click on your video, convincing them that this is something they need to know more about, because that is the goal of any YouTube thumbnail. If you have that content, that essentially elevator pitch of your thumbnail, which is definitely something you need to consider, because there is going to be a main focal point of attention in any thumbnail. And if that focal point is in the bottom right-hand corner of your thumbnail, you can essentially kiss any of your views that you could get goodbye, because you're not going to be getting those views anymore. It's going to be covered up by the timestamp on your thumbnail. Now, essentially the fix for this is to design in other areas of the thumbnail, and then finally, if you have to, put any of the remaining design in that bottom corner. Now, obviously, if there's a part of your design that doesn't really go to selling the overall aspect of the thumbnail, that doesn't really matter. Like if I have a landscape at the very bottom of my thumbnail, it doesn't matter that that corner is cut off, because people still get the overarching value of that landscape. If, however, let's say, for example, I put text at the bottom of my thumbnail, unless it's just a bunch of exclamation marks on the right-hand side of the screen, we have an issue, because that text is going to be covered up by that timestamp, and oftentimes that timestamp will be covering up a large portion of your text. And if this is the case, well, you can expect that people aren't going to be able to read all of that text. And while that can be okay in some cases, in other cases, that can be the reason why people don't find your video as curiosity generating, as interesting as they should. A thumbnail's goal is to essentially generate curiosity for your video. It's to tell people about your video and show them about your video without actually giving away every single thing you put in your video. Now, obviously, if you do this effectively, you can generate click-through rates of anywhere between 10 to 30 and even upwards of 30%. And this is the goal, because if your click-through rates are getting anywhere above 10%, that means your video is generating a lot of audience traction. That means people are seeing your video and they're saying, I am interested in this content, and they are clicking on it. They are interested, and this is something which happens with a lot of big channels like MrBeast, for example. These channels are able to generate these incredible click-through rates, and YouTube sees that and they reward it. Now, this is essentially what your channel's goal should be with thumbnails. But with thumbnails, as I mentioned, remember, that bottom right-hand corner of the screen is going to be the one thing that stops your video from getting that click-through rate. If everything else is successful, and obviously I'll go into these principles later on, so go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. But if everything else is successful, the one thing which will lower your click-through rate is that bottom right-hand corner. That is the corner that's covered up, and if that is the corner where you put anything interesting or anything notable for the viewer in, they're not going to be able to see it. That is going to pretty much wrap it up for this video, though. Keep all of your design aspects, all of your core aspects away from that corner, and keep them in the other 3 corners of your design. Well, that's going to be it for this video. Remember to leave a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.